Brian, do you?
Yep, sorry, looking for the button there.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Well, good
All right,
morning.
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say good morning, everybody. I'm Leslie Weber. I am the chair of the Legislative Affairs Committee. Bill, do you want to say good morning?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Bill Wishman, and I am the co-chair.
Great. And this is our now monthly schedule of Legislative Affairs Committee meetings. I thank you all for joining us. What I'm going to suggest is, in the interests of time and being able to get to our conversation, we won't go around two screens full of people, but if you would, behind your name, go ahead and rename it so that your organization is there, so that our guest and everybody else will know who's on the call. And if you speak, certainly feel free to introduce yourself more formally. As you know, we met weekly during the legislative session, and from here through the end of the year, we will meet monthly with special guests. And so we're so pleased today to welcome Eric Luedtke to our conversation. Many of you know Eric from his years of service representing Montgomery County in the House of Delegates, but and some of you may even have been classmates of Eric's. I understand you are an MCPS graduate of Wooten High, and then let's see, is Mr. Bridge on the phone this morning? Well, he can give you the go-tos for all of the University of Maryland graduates as well. But Eric stepped down from the House of Delegates in order to join the Moore administration as what's the official Chief Legislative Officer. So I think it sounds like the person in charge of making sure that the 10 big ideas that the governor presented to the General Assembly actually made it to the finish line. So we'll let you talk about that accomplishment in a minute. What we usually do is a few minutes of remarks. I heard Eric, I hope that's okay with you. And then we'll move into Q&A. If anyone has a question to ask, use the raise hand function or pop something in the chat. And Bill and I will try and keep an eye on those as they're coming in. Brian, Gigi, did we miss anything? Bill?
No, but I just wanted to chime in and say, I'm so excited to see you, Eric, and I'm so glad you're in this role. This is terrific.
That's nice. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Well, welcome. Let me turn it over to you, Eric.
Sure. Well, thanks for inviting me. First of all, I appreciate it. It's great to see so many faces of folks that I've known for many years and worked with in different capacities. I think the governor and those of us in the administration feel very good about where the 2023 session of the General Assembly landed. And I'll just hit on some high points before we dive into whatever questions folks have. I'll actually start not with legislation, but with the budget. Maryland has experienced a couple really great years in terms of budgeting, in part because of significant strong revenue growth related to the state of the economy, and in part related to significant federal funding that came down during the pandemic period and in the infrastructure legislation that followed because of the hard work of our federal partners, Senator Van Hollen, Senator Cardin, Representative Raskin, Representative Trone, and other folks. This year, though, that federal funding, large chunks of it started to fade out a little bit as the federal pandemic legislation ended. And as a result, actually, the state budget as introduced by the governor was smaller in Governor Moore's first year than it was in Governor Hogan's last year. So we are managing to keep the budget sustainable while also funding a lot of really important programs. And actually, the biggest challenge in the state budget and state government generally right now, frankly, is staffing, as it is, I know, for many nonprofits and businesses and folks who are having trouble finding the workforce that they need. It's not just a matter of the difficult labor market, but a lack of investment over a number of years in the state workforce. And that has very real impacts on the basic services that Marylanders receive. Just to give one example, since public safety is an issue that's on a lot of folks' minds right now, the vacancy rate in the parole and probations department, which is a key department in terms of public safety, has at times approached 30%, which is absolutely unsustainable if we're trying to make sure our communities are safe. So the governor and the Secretary of Budget and Management, Helene Grady, made it a high priority to reduce the state vacancy rate, to provide some compensation increases for state employees to help make sure that our state employees our salaries are competitive with local government, with the federal government, because we often lose people to other government agencies. So that was kind of the top line of the budget this year. In terms of legislation, the Governor Moore is not somebody who likes to slow down. If you've met him, you know he's somebody who is always on the move, constantly working hard. The direction he gave to his team was, we're not going to take it easy on our first year. We're going to take on some big and difficult issues and try to push the envelope a little bit. And since, you know, we're here with the chamber, I'll focus a little bit on economic development and workforce issues. But just in general, to set the framing, in modern history, we've never had a governor who in their first year got every single piece of legislation they introduced passed in some form. Governor Moore achieved that this year. He introduced 10 pieces of legislation, all 10 of them passed in some form. I say in some form because we have a legislative process and there are amendments that happen to bills, and that's an expected part of the whole process. But the governor's very excited at the reception that the legislature gave to his agenda. And in particular, in terms of workforce, one of the big initiatives that the governor pushed was an expansion of the military retirement credit for folks who've served in the armed forces. You know, the governor himself is a veteran. He sees that as an important recognition of the service that veterans have provided, but also it's a significant workforce issue. Maryland's federal military facilities are some of the most technically oriented military facilities in the country, right? The engineers working at Pax River, the cyber experts at Fort Meade, the biodefense experts at Fort Detrick. These are the folks working in these facilities are incredibly highly trained. They have skill sets that are deeply valuable to private industry, and we want them to stay in the state after they retire. And Maryland, frankly, has been falling behind on its military retirement exemption. So the governor introduced legislation to expand that exemption, which did pass for folks under 55. It's a slightly lower credit than it is for folks over the age of 55, but we believe that will have a significant impact on retention of retiring military personnel. It'll keep them in the state. It'll keep them in our economy. It'll help address some of the workforce issues we have. On the K-12 education side, the governor pushed a bill called the Maryland Educator Shortage Act. One of the biggest challenges right now for our schools is a lack of qualified educators. It's a problem that's existed for decades. It was made exponentially worse by the pandemic. So the governor proposed legislation to increase the pipeline of new folks coming into the classroom. The biggest top line item from that is, for the first time, Maryland is going to offer a stipend to student teachers during their student teaching experience. That the fact that student teaching is unpaid has been a huge barrier to people entering the profession. We believe that'll significantly increase the number of people who are training to be teachers at our colleges and universities in the state. And in particular, in specific shortage areas. Some of the worst shortages that we have are in very technical STEM fields. For example, in any given year, Maryland graduates fewer than 10 people certified to teach computer science. And given the importance of computer science in our economy, it's really important that we have strong computer science programs in our schools. So there are targeted investments related to increasing the pipeline in those shortage fields. This past week, earlier this week, the governor signed a number of bills out of his economic development package and bills that the legislature introduced independently of the governor, that the governor supported, related to economic development. And I'll hit on a couple of those briefly. The first is the Innovation Economy Infrastructure Act. So as you know, Maryland has a very tech-oriented economy, an economy that's constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible. And for a lot of businesses in that space, one of the big barriers to growth and frankly, just even starting a business is access to the basic infrastructure to do the kind of technical work necessary to be successful in those fields. So for example, wet labs in the biotech industry, SCIFs for federal contractors, quantum computing laboratories, advanced manufacturing facilities. These are expensive facilities to build. So the state has now created a matching grant program, not a tax exemption, but an actual upfront matching grant program that will help new businesses in those spaces to build those kinds of facilities. The Department of Commerce is already working to develop the regs to roll out the first round of grants, which is budgeted for $10 million. in the fiscal year that starts on July 1st. Another big challenge that we've been hearing about from particularly small business owners around the state is lack of access to capital, just challenges getting adequate capital. So the governor really wanted to focus on lending and banking and how the state could help to make capital more available to entrepreneurs. So he introduced a bill called the Access to Banking Act. It does two things. First of all, it reduces the state tax. There's essentially a tax that the state applies to banks based on the amount of their deposits that helps fund the Office of the Commissioner of Financial Regulation for the state. So it reduces that tax for bank and credit union physical branch locations in low and moderate income communities, right? To try to create an incentive to make banking more available in those communities. But as you know, much of banking is going online. Physical bank branches are not the financial hub that they used to be of the community. And so one of the other things that the bill does is it uses a surplus in the Office of the Commissioner of Financial Regulation to create new venture funds for financial technology solutions that will help lenders to identify sort of outside the box small business investment opportunities in low and moderate income communities, to find that, that smart entrepreneur with a bright idea who maybe doesn't necessarily have the connections to access significant capital. And so we're really excited about that bill. That bill was also signed into law earlier this week. As a part of the governor's economic development agenda, he uses a line that Maryland is a place that is asset rich and strategy poor, right? That we've got, these extraordinary federal facilities. We've got an incredible workforce. We have all these natural assets. And yet for all of that, state government has not really done a good job of defining and advocating for a cohesive economic development strategy, a strategic plan for the state's economy. The governor has charged the Department of Commerce with working on that idea. And, as part of that, I think the Department of Commerce is focusing in on the idea of really identifying in the range of, 3 to 5 industries that we really think the state can have a significant contribution to, aside from providing for the basic business climate in the state. And among those emerging industries where the governor thinks we have a lot of potential is actually the film and television industry. I know you all are familiar with some of the famous movies and TV series that have been made in Maryland, particularly in the Baltimore region. But in the DC region, there's a tremendous number of creators, directors, producers, writers who are engaging in the industry. So the governor supported and signed earlier in the week a bill introduced by Senator Griffith, who's the chair of the Finance Committee in the Senate here, to expand Maryland's film production activity tax credit and to create a new commission to help direct the state's kind of film, television, arts promotion activities. But you'll see over the next 12 months as that strategic plan starts to roll out, that the governor is really looking to partner actively with businesses, with nonprofits, identify those ways that the state can really lean in and support growth in our economy. And at the same time, deal with some of the basic business environment issues that have been a challenge for a while. Like, for example, the long response time that many businesses and nonprofits get in basic applications for permits and things from state government. And that obviously is not an issue just in state government. If you've been to Annapolis, there's a famous restaurant down here called Chicken Roost Deli. It's been around forever. And I was in Chicken Roost a couple of weeks ago and ran into a guy who was trying to open a pizza shop on Main Street in Annapolis, and he's been ready to open for 2 months, like ready to start tomorrow, waiting on a permit from the city of Annapolis, and he hasn't been able to get it. And I think we all recognize that, one of the big barriers to economic growth is just, we make life too hard on people trying to get started in business and in the nonprofit sector. So that's a priority as well, although a lot of that work is taking place less through legislation and more through the work that our secretaries are doing. So that's, brief summary. I'm really curious what folks have questions about, what I can answer.
Great. Well, thank you, Eric. Let me ask a follow-up, and then a reminder to folks, put a raise hand sign or something in the chat. So you mentioned the in conjunction in your conversation about banking, and you talked about the charge to identify folks who have some great ideas, maybe in underserved areas, sort of that overlooked entrepreneur. We encounter some of those folks as well in our work with the chamber and our member businesses. So is that if we have a referral to make, does it go to the Department of Commerce? Is that where it's living administratively in the government?
So that fund is a venture fund for financial technology solutions.
Okay.
So that's going to be housed in the Office of Commissioner of Financial Regulation. But yes, if you have small businesses that are seeking access to capital, definitely refer them to the State Department of Commerce, where, Commerce has been understaffed, as have many state agencies, and we're trying to ramp up staffing there. But there are a number of state programs that can provide capital that are frankly underutilized. And just to give one example, when the casino industry came to Maryland more than a decade ago now, a portion of casino revenue was set aside for something called the Small Minority Women-Owned Business Account that is intended to invest in minority and women-owned businesses. That account has always had a fund balance because we don't loan enough money out. The fund managers have not always been able to find enough businesses to take advantage of. So if you've got folks looking for capital, reach out to the Department of Commerce, connect them. We'll be excited to work with them.
Well, great. That's super, because of course, Eric, I'm sure you're aware of our work at this chamber with veterans groups. So they're often looking for capital when they're based in Maryland. And of course, that was one of the reasons we shared the governor's appreciation and lent our support to the bill to give veterans that tax credit so they could stay in Maryland and continue to grow those businesses. I do see a question in the chat from Todd at Sunflower. Interested in hearing initiatives to increase support for the Department of Labor's EARN programs, nonprofits who are working on workforce development and helping to grow and solve some of those staffing shortages that you mentioned.
Yeah, so EARN is a program in the Department of Labor that was created a number of years ago, actually by now County Executive of Baltimore County, Johnny Olszewski, was the sponsor of it. It's a really successful program. It does need more funding. And, Todd, I think over time, we're looking to increase the funding for the EARN grants to try to expand those EARN grants. We're starting to see more interest by a wider diversity of industries in applying for EARN grants. In particular, the cyber industry has really, they have a huge workforce problem. And so they've really been interested in partnering with the Department of Labor through the EARN program and with community colleges to help expand cybersecurity training programs in the state. But more broadly, our new Secretary of Labor, Portia Wu, is very interested in expanding apprenticeship programs and opportunities for kind of direct employment of folks. I'll also flag, particularly because in the nonprofit sector, but also in the for-profit sector, the governor's creation of the service year option. So this is one of the governor's big agenda items. Maryland is now the first state in the country to establish a service year option for recent high school completers, not just graduates, because some kids graduate, some kids with a disability don't get an actual diploma, but they get a certificate instead. But high school completers will have an opportunity to participate in a paid service year program that's a partnership between the state and an employer. It could be a nonprofit, it could be a local government, it could be a for-profit entity. The idea being to give those kids, particularly kids who finish high school but maybe don't quite know what to do next, they don't know if they want to go to college, they don't know what career field they want to go into, to give them an opportunity to develop some career experience, to build their social capital, to get some mentoring, to get professional development opportunities, and to get paid while doing it, and then to get a stipend at the end of it so they can step into their next role. So that's actually one of the biggest, most exciting things in terms of workforce from my perspective, particularly in the nonprofit sector. The Department of Service, the newly created Department of Service, and our new Secretary of Service, Paul Montero, are really excited to partner with nonprofits. So if that's something anybody here is interested in, you should definitely reach out to Secretary Montero.
All right, so I'm eyeballing Lara at a wider circle, thinking there may be indeed some opportunities there to enhance that workforce. So thank you for that. And also Todd says, thank you. So Sunflower Bakery, which of course does some wonderful work already with completers and folks there. Bill, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Leslie. Eric, this is fascinating. And again, we want to extend our thanks to you for participating today and sharing all of this information. Regions like North Carolina, particularly the Research Triangle, have made significant investments in broadband expansion and have leveraged it as a competitive advantage. We know that there's a lot of interest in pursuing expansion. And so you initiated, or Governor Moore initiated, a study to figure out how best to incentivize that type of expansion. Can you share more about that and really more about what you envision happening over the coming years in that space, and how we can better compete as a region?
Yeah, it's a bigger issue than people think, because first of all, it's a fundamental issue of infrastructure, right? We're in an age now where people need access to broadband as much as they need access to electricity and water, which is the basic need. I think a lot of people in the public look at the broadband debate and they think it's just about getting fiber to people's houses. And that's an important part of it. And actually, Maryland is doing pretty well in that respect. Montgomery County, for example, I think there are fewer than 50 homes that still don't have access to broadband in Canada. So, that does not look the same across the state. And in particular, our rural areas have serious challenges in access to broadband. Thanks to the work of our federal partners, there's significant new federal money that's coming in to help expand broadband infrastructure that the state is going to start deploying. They've already been deploying some money related to the pandemic era programs. We're starting to see that in sense significant expansions of broadband infrastructure. For example, Chop Tank Electric Cooperative, which is on the middle part of the Eastern Shore, a few years ago started supplying broadband as well. And they're hooking up something like 50 new homes a month, which is significant in the mid-shore. And these are often rural properties where last mile broadband infrastructure is very expensive to install. So that's in progress. The governor's bill created this study to kind of talk about next steps. There are a number of options how we could approach it. But it's not just a question of building the infrastructure, because one of the additional challenges is affordability. People being able to access the infrastructure that's already coming to their homes, particularly for lower income families. The federal government during the pandemic created a new program which helped support affordability by providing essentially a broadband stipend to low income families. That program is likely to phase out. And so one of the things we're going to look at the state level is what we can do as a state to help make sure folks can afford access to broadband. And then beyond that, it's not just a question of the infrastructure going to people's homes and small businesses. It's a question of the larger basic infrastructure, right? The fiber lines, the data centers, the backbones of the internet, essentially. And Maryland, a couple of years ago, created a new data center incentive program that's intended to bring more data centers to the state. That's already starting to show some results. There's a large new data center, actually a completely clean, 100% green energy data center being constructed in Frederick County right now. And part of our goal with that is to, essentially fight with Northern Virginia for some of that data center business. We'd like to attract some of the data centers that get built in Northern Virginia across the river, and in particular to some more rural parts of Washington County and Frederick County where they could frankly use the investment.
Thank you. Guy, I see a question here.
Good morning, Mr. Luedtke. How are you doing today?
Is it Guy or is it French? Is it Guy?
Funny, buddy. Quick question for you. I just want to thank you for your in your former role for your support as a strong advocate for assistance programs for water utilities. And recently, the Maryland Water System Assistance Program just gave WSSC $3.7 million out of the $20 million that was in that grant. This is two questions. Does the governor have any intention to establish a water bill assistance program permanently? And if so, And we understand that there's this perception that as the city goes, that so does the state. Baltimore City got $15 million of that grant.
Yeah.
If this program is established, how can we work with you to ensure funds come to Montgomery County, as their need is often overlooked because of this perception that the entire county is wealthy?
So it's a very good question. And I think we would like to, I mean, first of all, to go back to the infrastructure question for a second, there's a huge water infrastructure problem across the country, but in Maryland in particular, right? WSSE, frankly, is, you know, one of the best water systems in the country and does an extraordinary job. But we have tremendous issues with some of the water systems in the Baltimore region. In fact, there's a new commission that was created to look at whether to convert the Baltimore water system into a model more akin to how WSSE functions, a regional model of water, of providing water. There have been issues with the wastewater treatment plants in the Baltimore region, particularly Back River Sewage Treatment Plant, which is the largest sewage treatment plant in the Chesapeake Bay watershed in Maryland. And, you know, frankly, one of the reasons that the state is not meeting its Chesapeake Bay cleanup goals is because of the problems at that facility. There are also huge problems in our rural water systems. We have a lot of rural water systems that are still operating with significant issues with lead pipes, with, you know, inadequate staffing. There's just like every other industry, there's challenges recruiting and training and retaining water treatment operators, the folks that run these facilities. But Guy, your question specifically about the issue of water assistance, and for everyone else's background, one of the things that water utilities experienced during the pandemic was a significant increase in the backlog of outstanding debt. And that happened in part because water utilities stopped shutting off people's water during the pandemic in a lot of cases. And that's been traditionally one of the big tools that utilities have to get outstanding debts paid. So in the out of the ARPA funding, the state allocated $20 million to water assistance. And Guy, to your question, the increased allegation of Baltimore City didn't have anything to do with perceptions of wealth. It had to do with the quantity of debt. So the water debt in the Baltimore City system was over $100 million, $117 million of water debt, as opposed to 27 million in the WSSC system. So there was a proportional allocation made for the larger systems, which is why there was that difference. But obviously, this is a big issue going forward, and I think we would like to find ways to help the utilities to decrease those outstanding debts over time. The good news is, in addition to the significant investments in WSSC and Baltimore City DPW, the allocation, the way the allocation worked actually completely wiped out the outstanding debt in some of the smaller water systems in the state that are really struggling right now. So it's progress, but we've got more work to do.
Thanks, sir. We look forward to working with you.
Likewise.
I think Brian from the county chamber you raised your hand. Thanks, Brian.
Eric, I have two questions, actually. One is, a bill that I was very interested in was the bill that the governor introduced to provide incentives for last mile broadband type of projects, which turned into a study. I just wanted to know from you if you in your crystal ball, you knew what was going to happen with that study, and if we were going to see something again next year. And while your crystal ball is out, I was curious about any thoughts on the legislative package or the priorities for 2024.
Well, it's too early to say much about 2024, although, you know, there are obviously major themes and policy issues in the state we're going to be involved in. The governor's going to continue to focus on child poverty, on economic competitiveness, on education and the blueprint implementation. On the broadband bill, so the bill as originally introduced it essentially exempted from sales tax equipment that's installed as part of broadband expansion, under the theory that, you know, government shouldn't be taxing infrastructure trying to get built. And it also would have ended the taxation of broadband businesses installing broadband on federal grants. This is a perverse outcome of the Trump era tax reform, that the government is giving billions of dollars literally to broadband companies to expand broadband, but then taxing them on a portion of that money that the government's giving them. We're essentially taxing them on government grants, which is ridiculous. So the reason that did not go forward is that when we originally developed it, we expected and still believe that it would cost the state around $10 million, but the fiscal estimates in the legislature are done by an independent agency, and they estimated about $200 million. And that, of course, was scared the heck out of the legislature. So I think that conversation will continue. I think, the conversation will be about more targeted incentives to help with broadband expansion, and to continue the conversation about data centers. But I wouldn't want to, I don't know what the outcome of the study is going to be, because I'm not a technical expert on broadband rollout. So we'll see what the Office of Statewide Broadband comes up with.
I was kind of taking an inventory.
I'm just going to do a reminder to folks to please mute your lines when you're not speaking. So Tony.
Thanks, and thank you for doing this. Yeah, I've got a question about all this money that was received from the pharmaceuticals for the opioid problems we've had over the years, and yet people seeking help for their addictions. I haven't seen a really difference in terms of how hard it is for them to seek treatment and long-term treatment without it costing them money. So it just seems that we've had all these funds that politicians and all brag about being able to get, and yet as a state, if someone has an addiction problem, nothing's changed. It's as difficult to get in to get the help now as it was before. And if you need long-term treatment, it doesn't exist unless you have money. Are you guys looking at that?
Yeah, absolutely. Our new opioid czar, Emily Keller, the former mayor of Hagerstown, has been really focused on that issue. The state is in the process of making investments to significantly expand the number of treatment beds available. That's one of the biggest drivers of cost, is access to treatment beds, and working very closely with the hospital systems and the insurers to try to expand access to that. But there's a lot more going on in opioid policy right now, in addition to simply expanding the number of beds. So, for example, the governor just signed into a bill called the Josh Sims Act, which is named after a young man who unfortunately died of an overdose, and likely as a result of fentanyl intoxication. But it wasn't standard practice for hospitals to test for fentanyl. So there's no way to know. So we, on a basic level, like, we don't know how bad the opioid epidemic is, because we're not testing either overdose survivors or people that die from overdoses consistently. And the Josh Sims Act requires that. Another issue that prevents people from seeking treatment, and in particular treatment when they're experiencing an overdose, is fear of being arrested. So there was a nuance in Maryland law, in our Good Samaritan law, where a person, if I was with somebody who was experiencing an overdose and I drove them to a hospital, I couldn't be prosecuted for being a participant in the use of drugs, but the person experiencing the overdose could be. So that was kind of a perverse nuance in the law that we fixed this year. But you're right that the fundamental challenge is access to care, and those investments in new beds is going to be really important. I'll add also, it's a workforce issue too. The healthcare sector, and particularly behavioral health and substance abuse treatment, have huge workforce challenges that the state needs to step up to help address, and we're looking to partner with the private sector on this.
Thank you, Eric. Ashley.
Good morning, everybody, and good morning again. It's hard not to call you Delegate Luedtke, Eric.
Actually, you knew me before I was a delegate, so
it's still hard. It's still hard. I guess this is more of a comment than a question. I wanted to follow up on your introductory comments about the education bill and specifically addressing some of the shortage issues and the like. And I guess I just wanted to flag the early childhood education field and those who work with children 0 to 5. Because they are equally an important part of the entire system. And I know that Senator King and Delegate Solomon have done a lot to focus on that in recent years. And I guess I just wanted to flag it and would definitely look forward to working with y'all on that, as I've heard the governor speak about education and also flag 0 to 5 as being important. And so happy to work with y'all on that in future years.
Yeah, 100%. I appreciate that. And I think in the next couple of weeks, the state's going to be announcing its first round of grant recipients for the child care facility capital investment program. So that's great.
Great, thank you. Kyle.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Eric. That was very informative. I'm with the Maryland Small Business Development Center at the University of Maryland. If you haven't heard about us, but real quickly, we provide no cost one-on-one business counseling to small businesses, whether they're startups or they're in business. So that's my commercial. My observation is, as far as the expansion of broadband to rural, I mean, I just wanted to footnote that actually Baltimore City has one of the lowest access to broadband, which is, everybody would think would be ridiculous, but it's an issue of affordability. And that's the same model that applies to the rural as well. And there's also some really great technologies out there right now, like white space and some other things that I think are going to be very, that will help with the rural broadband. As far as the providing money to these ventures, these small venture nascent technology companies that are in more underserved areas, do you have more details about how that approach is? I mean, you seem kind of like it's information because it just passed.
Yeah.
But I mean, for example, is there any way that we can help with, like, figuring out how to do intake? We work with TechCo. We have our own tech team. And so we would, if you're looking for collaboration, I think we're one organization. I know some others would love to participate in trying to figure out how do we make that work. And I worked on the Plum project that was in Baltimore City a few years ago. I was on the working project for that. And of course, that died during the Trump administration. But that also, a lot of learning about how difficult it is to try to get money to that lower income group, that those businesses that are trying. It's almost impossible, but I'd love the challenge.
Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, to answer your question about the banking related program, you should reach out to the Office of Commissioner on Financial Regulation.
Okay. And just one more thing, I'm really glad that you're expanding the movie and TV, because I have a son that's graduating and maybe in television studies next year. So maybe he'll be able to find a job here in Maryland. Thank you.
Well, the governor's setting the goal high. He the other day he announced at an event that he was going to try to get Black Panther 3 made in Maryland. So we'll see.
All right. Before I go to Dennis, I saw a chat note from Delegate Solomon, so I wanted to acknowledge the delegate is here and thank him. And also as well, I see Council Member Siemens from Tacoma Park, and then Representatives Kathleen Connor from Representative Raskin's office, and of course Ashma Talwar from Senator Van Hollen. So I, hope I haven't done the classic and missed someone representing our elected officials this morning. If I did, just wave your hand again, but thank you all for joining us. Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Eric. Dennis Alexander with Easter Seals. I just wanted to piggyback on something that Ashley raised, and we actually didn't plan this ahead of time, but I'm glad she raised this issue of early childhood education. For organizations like ours and even for-profit child care facilities, workforce has been a real challenge. One, because we can't afford to pay them a livable wage. They probably make about half as much as public school teachers do. And secondly, with the implementation of the blueprint, which you also mentioned was a governor's priority, I think 30% of the early childhood development programs are to be provided by nonprofits like ours or for-profit facilities, third party. One of the huge issues that's really unique in this area, especially in the DMV, is the issue around the pay equity fund that DC passed. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but the DC Council 2 years ago passed what they call the pay equity fund to basically bring the salaries of early childhood educators on par with the DC public school teachers. And they allocated about $200 million over the next 4 years in order to do that. And it's an issue especially at DMV, because we operate early childhood development centers in Maryland and Northern Virginia and DC. And obviously, when somebody sees that they can make twice as much money in DC, that's where they're going to go. And so, again, I just want to flag this as an issue for organizations like ours and other early childhood development facilities, that we're going to have a huge, even larger workforce issue when people start scooting over the border to DC from Maryland in order to be paid more. So that's something I think that the governor's office ought to be aware of, and the legislature, and see if there's a plan in the future to try to address this issue.
Yeah, that's a fascinating program that I'm going to look into. I really appreciate that. And look, you hit the governor's office and the legislature at the same time, because the leader in the House of Delegates on this issue is Delegate Jared Solomon, who's with us. So
yeah,
so you got us both. That's great. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Monica.
Good morning, Eric. I'm trying to think, like, what do we call you? Delegate?
Just Eric.
In various roles. So so great to see you this morning. I did want to just follow up on my colleague Guy Andes' request for any assistance that you could provide for coming up with a standing program for water assistance, but also to encourage the governor to please pledge his support for the LIWAP program. As you know, that was the federal program modeled after LIHEAP. It helped quite a few of our customers in both of our counties. So anything that you could do on that front would be very much appreciated to fund that once again, because that was a pot of money that people could access directly through their Department of Social Services, Health and Human Services in each county. I also wanted, on a personal note, to thank you for providing a program for teachers to do their student teaching and provide a stipend. My son is actually at the Towson University to be an elementary school teacher. And so that's a wonderful program. So on a personal note, I wanted to thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad your son's going in the right profession. I was a teacher in MCPS for 11 years, so it's the best job.
I know. And I'm a product of MCPS, so I know it's a great system.
As are all the best people in the world.
Of course. Thank you.
All right, well, we are coming up to the end of our time. We try and allow people to get in with it around 9:15. But Eric, you just mentioned your career path, and you said, oh, you were a teacher and then you were an elected official. So last comment for all, how are you finding the transition from being a legislator towards now being on the executive branch?
Great. I love it. I actually left 2 jobs for this. I was a legislator, and I was also a professor in the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland. And I've never had a staffing role before. I have to tell you, with the governor, what you see is what you get. Like the man he is on TV, he's even more so, in private. So he's a joy to work for. He's put together an extraordinary team that I'm proud to work with every single day. So I'm loving it. I'm loving every minute of it.
All right, good. Well, we're glad to hear it. We'll talk to you in 3.5 years and see how you're feeling that.
Yeah, how big the bags under my eyes are by
then. All right. Well, it couldn't be worse than being a middle school teacher. We'll go there.
Although I always joke that being a middle school teacher was good training for politics.
There we go. Good. Well, thank you all for joining us. Brian Levine, I'm looking at you. I don't even remember the date for our next meeting in June.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what date it was. We're going to move it a week later, and I'm working on putting that together right now. So it'll be in middle June. Keep an eye out in your emails and your notices about when that'll be rescheduled to. And if you're interested, tomorrow our Infrastructure and Land Use Committee meeting is interviewing planning board candidates. So there's 2 more vacancies out of the 5, including the chairs. So that begins at 10:30. If you want to sign up and swing by or join by Zoom, go to our website's event page and sign up. And then, of course, Leslie and Bill, June 8th, we have our annual dinner, and we'll be honoring our Legislator of the Year, Lily Chi, among other honorees. So we hope that we will see you there as well.
Great. Thank you for that. Again, thank you, Eric, for taking the time this morning to join us. I did notice, if you were reading the chat, that Andy Bridge did get his obligatory Go Terps in. So of course, lacrosse championships are coming up and everybody will be watching that. But thank you all again for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you in June. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.